The year was 1834, and the parish of Ashbourne lay smothered in a hush so complete that even the crows seemed reluctant to speak. The air carried that faint iron scent that follows rain through old stone corridors, and in the manor's western wing the lamps had long burned past their intended hour. Somewhere within those walls something had begun again. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The earliest record comes from a letter dated March 3rd, 134, penned by Dr. Jonathan Hale, recently appointed physician to the Ashbourne estate. His tone is brisk, professional, though beneath the sentences one senses hesitation. He writes of his arrival to find the household diminished, 5 servants dismissed without explanation, the remainder instructed to avoid the lower chambers. Family themselves, Sir Alden Ashbourne, his wife Margaret, and their surviving daughter Evelyn are described as well in countenance, yet of restless aspect, as though listening for a sound I could not hear. Hale's notes shift quickly from domestic to anatomical. In a later margin he sketches the structure of the human ear, labeling certain passages with questions rather than names. If sound may live beyond its moment, he wonders, where then does it dwell? His handwriting trembles halfway through the line. By May he reports an irregularity of pulse, shared by father and child, not arrhythmia, he clarifies, but a double beat, as though the heart responds to another, unseen rhythm. The local curate attributes it to hereditary frailty. Hale disagrees, recording nocturnal disturbances that commence at precisely the same minute each night, regardless of hour kept. Servants whisper of footsteps beneath the flagstones, slow and deliberate, stopping only when one listens. The nursemaid claims that Eveline sleepwalks, though the path she takes, always toward the sealed crypt door, are too precise to be the work of dreams. June 12th brings Hale's first direct mention of what he calls the pulse anomaly. I placed my ear to the child's chest, he writes, and heard not the familiar thud of blood against bone, but a distant echo like water dripping in a deep well. He requests permission for further study. Sir Alden refuses. 2 days later, the doctor's entries grow sparse, his script erratic. The final note in this section reads simply, "Sound persists even when the source does not. I am beginning to suspect the house itself remembers." No further documentation from Hale exists after July. Local reports state he departed abruptly, leaving his instruments behind. The estate accounts, however, list continued payments to him for nearly a year thereafter, signed not by Sir Alden but by E. Ashbourne, and thus begins the record. The Ashbourne family kept their silence, and the parish moved on. Yet in the county archives, between medical invoices and parish births, there remains one torn ledger page bearing the faint outline of an ear drawn in ink, beside a single phrase written in another hand, "It is not her heartbeat that wakes me." The winter of 1835 came early to Ashbourne. The manor's high chimneys bled smoke against a sky the color of lead, and for the first time in decades the surrounding fields went untended. What few servants remained spoke little, moving as though in prayer. From the physician's absence rose another hand in the record, the letters of Margaret Ashbourne to her sister in Whitby, preserved in a private collection. They begin formally, concerned with weather and propriety, but by November her composure had begun to slip. Eveline no longer dreams as other children do. She writes. She hears them first, voices not our own, repeating what has not yet been spoken. Sometimes she answers before I have said a word. The sister's replies are lost, but Margaret's tone grows more desperate. She writes of mirrors fogging from within, of her husband descending nightly into the east cellar to listen, though to what she cannot say. By December, Sir Alden's journal resumes the story. His script, careful and scholarly, suggests a man attempting control through documentation. He notes that he has reopened the manor's old infirmary, long disused since the fever years, and equipped it for acoustic trials. Instruments of brass and glass fill the tables, phonographs, barometers, and a curious contrivance he names the resonant chamber, built to trap the vibrations of the living. In an entry dated December 19th, he records a test involving his daughter. The pulse remains doubled. When she places her hand upon the wall, the rhythm slows, as if some exchange takes place between flesh and stone. I begin to understand what Hale feared. Servants testify, though not in writing, that the chamber's experiments continued past midnight, marked by faint humming that made the rafters quiver. The nursemaid fled the estate on Christmas Eve, claiming the child's reflection in the window spoke a moment later than she did. Margaret's final letter, dated January 2nd, 1836, bears no salutation. There are two of her now, the one I birthed and the one that listens. When she breathes, the candles lean toward her. Alden says it is progress. I say it is possession. After this, all correspondence ceases. In parish records from that same month, Sir Alden donated a substantial sum for the construction of a new crypt gate to prevent future intrusion. No births, deaths, or marriages from the manor are recorded again for 7 years. But beneath the formalities, a pattern begins to show. On the backs of several receipts, written in the same trembling ink as Hale's final note, appear diagrams of the ear's internal spiral, now annotated with new terms: retained echo, reversal, resonant inheritance. Archivists later observed that each drawing contained a second, fainter spiral, almost imperceptible, turning backward within the first. The last of these pages is unsigned, but at its corner someone has scrawled a single phrase: "To hear what was once heard is to invite it back." Thus ends the second phase of the Ashbourne record, a descent not into madness, but into method. Their inquiries had moved from the body to the walls themselves, as though searching for a language older than speech. The manor's chimneys would not smoke again until spring. By then, only one member of the family remained within its halls. Spring 1836. The parish clerk noted in passing that Sir Alden Ashbourne had taken ill of the nerves. No medical confirmation followed. What did appear, however, were pages from a private field journal, part anatomy, part theology, recovered decades later from a crate marked property of a Ashbourne. The first entries bear the calm precision of a man clinging to reason, sketches of ossicles, cochlea, and the human larynx rendered with almost devotional care. But as the pages progress, the script tightens, words crowding the margins. The body receives sound as the grave receives the dead, he writes, yet not all remains buried. He describes the construction of a secondary resonant chamber below the manor's east cellar, accessible only through a trapdoor concealed beneath the old anatomy table. Within it, he experiments with tuning forks, glass cylinders, and preserved tissue. He claims to have drawn tone from matter long silent. The journal shifts from experiment to revelation. He records that Eveline no longer eats or sleeps as before, that her pulse aligns with frequencies measured in the walls, and that she speaks in the voices of those departed, her mother's among them. Margaret Ashbourne, it seems, had died quietly in her rooms sometime that February. No physician was summoned, no burial recorded. Sir Alden's grief takes the form of calculation. He charts the distances between notes in her voice, the intervals of her laughter before death, as if by quantifying them he might resurrect their source. Every tone possesses memory, he writes. The living body may yet serve as its archive. Neighbors recall hearing faint singing from the direction of the manor on windless nights, an unbroken tone that rose and fell like breathing. No hymn, they said, but something older. By late summer, Alden's entries become fragmented. He notes that the walls now return his words before he has spoken them. that Eveline's shadow lags by nearly a heartbeat, and that her eyes have grown pale as candle glass. In one passage, nearly illegible, he remarks, "I have discovered the frequency of mourning. It rests somewhere between blood and stone. The final intact page bears a single experiment: subject, self, purpose, transference of echo, method, sustained tone through chamber, duration indefinite." After this, no further writing in his hand appears. The parish ledger for November 1008, 136, records the appointment of a caretaker to the estate, one Mr. Lucian Brooke, to maintain the property during the family's convalescence abroad. Yet no ship manifests, no foreign correspondence, no subsequent records of the Ashbournes have ever been found. When Brooke arrived, he found the manor silent but not still. In his deposition, years later, he recounts hearing a sound like breathing behind the plaster, as though the walls themselves drew air. He found the cellar locked, its key hung neatly by the door. The chamber below had been bricked shut, but from within came, he said, a faint humming, steady as a pulse. He sealed it further and left the manor to dust and ivy. No further mention of the Ashbourne name appears in county records after that year. Only one more scrap survives, a folded note discovered in the parish archives, unsigned, in a hand not unlike Eveline's. The sound remains. It only needed a listener. Autumn 1842. For 6 silent years the manor stood abandoned, its windows shuttered and the grounds overrun with ash and nettle. Then came the first report from the new tenant, Professor Edwin Marin, a lecturer from King's College who leased the property for research in acoustical phenomena. His surviving correspondence with a colleague in London reveals that he had heard of the Ashbourne estate's peculiar design, its double corridors, the resonance of its stonework, and believed it an ideal site for his experiments. He mentions rumors of a sealed chamber beneath the eastern floor, dismissed as local superstition. The professor's early letters are precise, confident. He describes the acoustics as remarkably sympathetic, noting that a whisper in one room could travel, unchanged, to another several halls away. But by the 3rd week, his tone falters. "There are voices I cannot account for." He writes on October 3rd, "Not echoes, precisely responses. My own words, but slower, as if aged before returning." His assistant, Thomas Gray, kept a small notebook of observations. He records that their instruments, brass tuning forks, phonographs, and an early resonator coil, would activate without touch, humming at frequencies far below human hearing. On one occasion, Marin ordered the cellar wall partially excavated. Behind the brick, they discovered a second wall, thinner, sounding hollow when struck. By mid-October, workmen refused to continue. Gray notes that they complained of headaches, of hearing a woman's breath against their ears even when standing alone. Marin dismissed them, continuing the excavation himself. On October 21st, he wrote his final letter. "The chamber is older than the house. Someone meant it to remain sealed, yet it calls like a wound. There is music within the stone. Thomas swears he hears a heartbeat behind it. I begin to think the Ashbournes succeeded in binding more than memory here. If the sound should cease, do not mistake it for silence." 3 days later, the local magistrate found the manor deserted. The cellar door stood open, the air thick with a low vibration that caused the lamps to flicker. Gray was never found. Marin's coat and notes remained on the anatomy table, his spectacles folded neatly beside them. When masons from the parish attempted to reseal the cellar, they reported that the stones sweated and that their chisels dulled against the inner wall. One man swore he heard a child humming from the other side. The records end there. The estate fell back into ruin, its ownership disputed, its name omitted from new maps. But in a county archive catalogue dated 1901, a clerk appended a curious note beside the old Ashbourne file. "Auditory irregularity persists in region. Locals avoid approach after dusk. Complaint, whispering earth. The manor itself was razed sometime before the Great War. Yet visitors to the hill where it stood have reported a peculiar phenomenon, a faint pulse beneath the soil, steady, rhythmic, just on the edge of hearing. The last known photograph of the site, taken in 1937, shows only a barren slope and the outline of a foundation. But in the lower corner of the image, magnified, one can make out the blurred shape of a child standing among the stones, head slightly turned, mouth open as if listening. Beneath the photo, in fading ink, someone has written, "Echoes do not die, they wait. March 1843." The records resume with the arrival of Dr. Julian Hargreaves, an anatomist from Edinburgh who acquired the Ashbourne property through auction after Professor Merrin's disappearance. His stated purpose, according to a letter sent to the Royal Medical Society, was to investigate possible mineral anomalies producing hallucinatory sound. His private papers, however, later found in a locked chest at his nephew's home, tell a darker story. "It is the human heart," he writes, "that stores resonance. The Ashbournes understood this. They built not a home, but a resonant body, a structure designed to remember pain. Hargreaves's obsession with sympathetic anatomy had already made him a quiet scandal among his peers. He believed that emotional experience left measurable imprints upon the organs, that terror, grief, or devotion could alter the body's natural frequency. At Ashbourne, he hoped to prove it. He began by reopening the cellar that Merrin had disturbed. The journal describes his first descent. The air seemed thick with the scent of rust and fennel. I heard my own pulse return to me from the walls, yet it did not match its rhythm. There is something living in the stone, a stored vibration, perhaps of voices long extinguished. He brought with him an assortment of surgical instruments, tuning forks, and preserved organs from the medical college. He recorded his observations with clinical precision, but by the second month the entries grow fevered. He begins to refer to the hidden chamber not as it but her. She answers when I knock. Witness statements from local workers corroborate that Hargreaves kept irregular hours, often working through the night, singing hymns in Latin as he struck the cellar wall with a hammer. They claimed the vibrations could be felt across the hillside. In one surviving notebook, there appears a sketch of a heart suspended in a wire cradle, labeled Specimen A Constance Analog. Beneath it, in smaller hand, constructed from resonance patterns within the wall itself. He seemed convinced that the house retained a biological pulse. He wrote that the Ashbournes, through repetition of ritual and decay, had created a sympathetic field strong enough to preserve emotion beyond death. He sought to map this phenomenon, calling it cardial memory transference. On April 3rd, he conducted what appears to have been his final experiment. A letter drafted to a colleague but never sent reads, at precisely 4:47 p.m. The resonance reached critical harmony. The tone emerged not from the device, but from beneath the floorboards. I could feel it within my chest, vibrating against my own heartbeat. The wall is thinning. I believe the frequency will reveal her in full. The following morning, the housekeeper found his laboratory door locked from the inside. No response. The constable who forced entry later testified that the air was so dense with vibration it shook the buttons on his coat. Hargreaves was slumped in his chair, eyes open, expression calm. The heart-shaped specimen still hung above the table, gently swaying. No sign of decomposition was noted, yet the body was cold. The official cause, cardiac arrest. The coroner, unnerved, refused to dissect the remains, writing only, "The organ displays unusual elasticity, as if the tissue remembers warmth. The manor was sealed again. For nearly a century, no one disturbed the site." But the parish death registry of 1843 contains a small annotation in the margin, likely made by the clerk who recorded Hargreaves's passing. Hour of death corresponds exactly with Van Dre's demise of 47, 4 years premature. The implication was dismissed as clerical error. But it remains underlined twice in red ink. June 1843. What followed the death of Dr. Hargreaves was not silence but containment. The Crown appointed a temporary custodian for the property, a chemist named Mr. Elias Rathbone, whose brief was to inventory Hargreaves's effects and dispose of medical refuse. He arrived expecting decay, but instead found a laboratory that seemed curiously preserved, as though untouched by air or time. Among the items catalogued were 27 vials labeled Tinctura Cordis, a sealed jar containing what appeared to be calcified tissue, and a folio of diagrams depicting human hearts etched with geometric inscriptions. But most striking was a brass instrument roughly the size of a coffin, described as a resonance chamber powered by clockwork. Rathbone's initial report to the magistrate is pragmatic, but his personal journal, kept secretly, reveals growing unease. It hums, he wrote on June 9th, not from within, but around. The air near the chamber moves though the gears are still. I felt it thrumming against my palm like the first shudder of a pulse before birth. He documented attempts to dismantle the machine. Each failed, bolts sheared off as if the metal resisted intrusion. When struck, it emitted a tone too deep to be heard, only felt through bone. One of his assistants, a boy of 16, collapsed mid-examination, bleeding from the ears. The parish physician attributed it to heat stroke. Rathbone knew better. By June 14th, he began performing controlled tests. He placed small animals near the chamber, mice, a sparrow, then a stray catabs, observing how each fell still as the vibration deepened. None decayed afterward. Their bodies remained supple, color unchanging, as if arrested between death and life. It preserves, he noted, but not as formaldehyde does. This is preservation by sound, not substance. The tissue remains obedient, awaiting instruction. The final entry before his handwriting deteriorates, records an extraordinary event. Tonight the tone changed. I heard something that was not mechanical. It was a woman's sigh, followed by 3 beats, heartbeats unmistakable and wrong. They did not come from the chamber, but from the walls themselves, as if the house had learned to mimic breath. Neighbors complained of disturbances, windows rattling at midnight, livestock panicking without cause. On June 17th, a constable arrived after reports of light beneath the soil. Rathbone greeted him at the gate, incoherent, hands shaking, insisting he had made contact. When the constable entered the cellar, he described the resonance chamber still running, though no one had wound its mechanism. Rathbone stood beside it, motionless. His eyes were open, his pupils fixed. His pulse was faint but present. He was moved to the infirmary, where he lingered for 3 days before dying without regaining speech. The chamber was removed under official supervision and shipped to London for study. The wagon driver testified that all 4 horses collapsed near the parish border and could not be revived. The shipment never reached the city. No record exists of its arrival, and the object has never been located. Within months, vegetation on the Ashbourne property withered. The ground turned gray, lifeless, as if the soil itself had exhaled something vital. The estate was formally condemned in September 1843, its cellar sealed with limestone and iron pins. A single surviving document from Rathbone's effects, a letter addressed to no one, was found years later in an archive box mislabeled Mineral Samples 1843. In it he writes, "If the sound stops, the heart will start. If the heart stops, the sound will begin again. It is not death that lingers here, it is repetition." And below, in trembling script, "Do not let her echo reach the living." Winter 1844. The official record grows thin after Rathbone's death, as if the parish itself wished to erase its involvement. Yet among the university's restricted archives in Durham lies one document connecting the vanished resonance chamber to a later experiment, a bound volume known only as the Heart-Glass manuscript. Its author is unsigned, though handwriting analysis suggests it belonged to Dr. Clement Ward, an anatomist expelled from St. Thomas's for ethical deviations in the study of cardiac regeneration. Ward appears to have acquired fragments of Hargreaves's notes through an intermediary, perhaps a former assistant, and continued the work in secrecy. The manuscript opens with a familiar phrase, "The body remembers, the pulse of the dead endures where faith fails." Ward's hypothesis extended beyond resonance. He proposed that the human heart could function as a recording vessel, imprinting emotion not as memory but as vibration. He called this process phonosanguine encoding, a phrase later cited in fringe medical journals but never proven. Through a series of sketches, Ward reimagined Hargreaves's resonance chamber as a human-sized prism lined with mirrors and copper filaments. In the margins, he speculated that the device was tuned to a specific frequency derived from the last heartbeat of Constance Ashbourne, the woman whose suffering, he believed, had birthed the anomaly beneath the manor. Her pain became harmonic, he wrote, endless because it was never answered. Such suffering creates its own rhythm, seeking continuation. Ward's experiments took place not at Ashbourne, but in an abandoned infirmary outside Whitby. He procured cadaver hearts from unclaimed paupers and subjected them to vibrational tests using a modified pump mechanism. Most ruptured within minutes. One, however, survived, contracting faintly though removed from any body. This specimen remained active for 6 days. By the 7th, Ward claimed the heart began to hum, producing an inaudible tone measured only by the trembling of glass nearby. He called it Specimen 12 and wrote that it emitted a pattern identical to seismic disturbances reported in the Ashbourne district a year earlier. "It is as if the manor has found me," he wrote. "The frequency carries across distance. I have not recreated it. I have answered it." A final series of entries detail his attempt to translate the sound into language by passing it through a phonograph diaphragm. The results were destroyed in a fire that consumed the infirmary in February 1845. Only fragments remain: smoke, stained paper, warped brass, and a single line legible amid the ash. "She spoke my name, though she never knew me." Local accounts from the time mention no casualties, but the townspeople referred thereafter to the site as the breathing hall. Visitors reported the sensation of a slow inhalation within the walls, though no wind entered. By the century's end, the building was demolished, its stones repurposed for a coastal sanatorium. The manuscript resurfaced in 1911 when a curator named Miss Eleanor Bray catalogued it among medical curiosities. Her notes remark that several pages appeared to vibrate faintly under her fingers. She attributed this to nerves. Yet the notation in the catalogue margin remains chillingly mundane. When held to the ear, one detects a pulse. Today, the manuscript is sealed in a temperature-controlled case at the Durham Historical Archives. The label reads simply, unverified, Heart-Glass Project 1844-1845. Visitors claim that if you stand too near the glass, you can feel your own pulse stutter in time with something faint and patient on the other side. April 1847. By all official accounts, the Ashbourne property had lain dormant for nearly 4 years, condemned, unsold, forgotten. Yet the parish register for that spring contains a terse notation beside the date April 3rd, lights observed upon the hill, earth vibrating. That same night, in towns as distant as Whitby and Bath, seismographs recorded faint rhythmic tremors, 3 pulses evenly spaced, too precise to be tectonic. The timing aligns perfectly with the final entries of Dr. Hargreaves and Augustus Van Dre's respective deaths, though separated by years. Scholars later called it the convergence event. A contemporary letter from Dr. Clement Fairborn, a physician traveling through Sussex, provides the only first-hand description. He wrote to a colleague, near midnight, the sky above Ashbourne Hill glowed as if the soil burned from beneath. No smoke, no flame, only illumination steady as the rise of dawn. The air vibrated in the lungs. It was as if the earth itself were breathing. I thought I heard a woman's voice beneath. The hum, repeating a word I could not understand. Fairborn's coachman corroborated the account, claiming that when they approached the site, the horses froze as if turned to stone. He swore that the ground beat like a heart, and that every attempt to step forward felt resisted by a push from the air. They fled before dawn. 3 days later, the vibration ceased. The soil, once gray and barren, was described as soft and black as velvet, though no vegetation grew there again. The parish clerk, unable to categorize the phenomenon, recorded it under acts of God. Unbeknownst to Fairborn, the archives show that a team from the Royal Society arrived at the manor weeks later under orders to investigate residual magnetism. They found nothing, no sound, no light, but noted that their instruments failed near the cellar site. Compasses spun uselessly. Their report concluded with the phrase, "Phenomenon non-repeatable, cause undetermined." For nearly a century, no further activity was recorded. The estate decayed into folklore, the house that listened. Locals spoke of travelers who camped on the hill and woke to find their hearts beating out of rhythm. Some said you could still hear breathing if you pressed your ear to the ground. Then, in 1965, during the excavation of what would become the Ashbourne Heights subdivision, a construction crew unearthed a sealed iron vault beneath 6 feet of limestone. Inside were remnants of a brass mechanism, the lost resonance chamber, and 2 preserved journals. One bore the initials E.R. Elias Rathbone. The other, bound in black leather, was unsigned. Archaeologists catalogued the find without realizing its significance until an intern, transcribing Rathbone's final pages, noticed a repeated line scrawled between the diagrams. If the heart ceases, the sound begins again. The second journal contained a single complete entry, dated April 3rd, 1008, 147. The pulse aligns. She is awake again. Moments after the vault was opened, workers reported nausea, tinnitus, and the sensation of pressure inside the chest cavity. Within the hour, 3 suffered cardiac arrhythmia requiring hospitalization. The site was closed, officially due to chemical contamination, and no chemical traces were ever found. The vault and its contents were quietly transferred to the Charleston Historical Society, sealed and filed alongside other anomalous medical materials. Few knew of its link to the Van Dre or Ashbourne families. Fewer still recognized the date. Today, April 3rd remains the anniversary of multiple deaths, tremors, and electrical anomalies across the region, each subtle, always at 4:47 p.m. Those who have studied the pattern claim it coincides exactly with a faint subsonic pulse detectable beneath the soil of Ashbourne Hill, repeating every 30 seconds. And though instruments cannot locate its source, those who stand there long enough swear they feel it, not under their feet but within their ribs. The heart remembers what the earth cannot forget. June 1847. A final document, an unsigned letter sealed in wax and discovered in the Charleston archives, was addressed to the Office of Provincial Medical Records, London. Its author claimed to be one of the Royal Society's field agents who had participated in the investigation at Ashbourne Hill that spring. His tone is measured, almost academic, yet what he describes drifts steadily toward the impossible. Our readings indicate he begins that beneath the bricked cellar lies a cavity precisely aligned to the human thoracic proportions, its dimensions nearly identical to that of an adult chest cavity. It is as though the house itself were constructed upon a body's design, its corridors echoing arterial paths, its rooms chambers of some slumbering organ. The account continues with unnerving precision. The agent reports that when their instruments descended into the cavity, the air itself pulsed at intervals of 72 beats per minute. Each tremor sent dust cascading from the stonework, and the faint odor of iron hung in the damp air. They assumed it to be groundwater corrosion until they noticed condensation collecting in rhythmic patterns, small beads forming and dispersing in synchrony with the vibration. We realized, he writes, that the structure did not merely respond to movement, it generated it. He describes an object embedded within the floor, a mass resembling fused bone and metal, still faintly warm to the touch. When tapped, it emitted a low hum felt rather than heard, one that seemed to travel up the arm and settle in the chest cavity. One assistant fainted outright, convinced his heart had stopped. Later, when they reviewed their recordings, they found no sound at all, only blank tape, punctuated every 30 seconds by a single spike of static. The agent notes it corresponded exactly to the pulse we measured beneath our feet. Their superiors ordered immediate withdrawal, the chamber resealed, the site declared unstable, yet the letter implies the agent disobeyed. That night, he returned alone, compelled by what he called the pull of the rhythm. In his words, it no longer seemed an echo, but an invitation. I understood then that the Ashbournes had not sought to preserve memory, they had sought to make it flesh. He claims to have witnessed movement in the wall, a slow peristaltic motion, as though stone and mortar were drawing breath. He dropped his lamp and saw, just before the flame died, something glistening at the chamber's center, a shape that reflected light like wet skin. The letter ends abruptly, mid-sentence. It is not beneath us. We are within it. No signature follows. That letter was never officially filed. It surfaced only in 1893 when the Historical Society catalogued the remnants of the Ashbourne estate. The document bore no date, only the faint watermark of the Royal Society seal. Experts now agree the handwriting matches that of Dr. Clement Fairborn, presumed missing since 1847. Local folklore evolved accordingly. Villagers began avoiding the hill entirely, saying that the soil there beats louder after rain. Travelers spoke of hearing whispers through stethoscopes pressed to the ground. One nurse at the nearby infirmary claimed that during a thunderstorm the patient's heart monitors pulsed in unison, 72 per minute, before all briefly flatlined. In the official medical journal of 1902, an anonymous reviewer added a final note to the Fairborn file: the Ashbourne pulse persists. It is measurable but not localizable. We are confident the source is biological. To this day, no one has determined what lies at the true center of Ashbourne Hill. Some say the manor itself was merely an organ, part of something vaster, buried deeper. Others believe the experiment succeeded and that the rhythm we hear is not death, but continuation. The heart beneath the soil has not ceased. October 1849, the manor had long since collapsed into ruin, its roof fallen, its windows gaping like sockets emptied of sight. The parish made no mention of restoration. The land was marked barren, yet those who strayed too near the foundations spoke of a strange tranquility, a silence that was not absence but presence. When the autumn rains came, the soil swelled, and the rhythmic tremor returned, soft, deliberate, a pulse too regular to be wind or water. Shepherds on the neighboring downs claimed their flocks would freeze and turn toward the hill as if hearing something beyond human range. A single visitor that year, Thomas Elridge, a surveyor tasked with redrawing the county's boundaries, recorded what is now the last known account before the estate was sealed under government protection. His notebook, found decades later, is an unsteady blend of cartography and confession at 4:47 p.m. precisely. He writes, "The ground beneath the old cellar began to vibrate. The vibration resolved into tone, and the tone, God help me, into something like a heartbeat. It was not loud, it was near, as though the land remembered being alive." He notes that his compass spun briefly before stilling, pointing not north but directly toward the manor's ruins. He describes a warmth rising through the soles of his boots and a pressure in the chest that mimicked panic, though his breathing remained steady. "I could feel it beneath my ribs," he continues, "as though the rhythm had entered me, each pulse in the earth answered by one within my own chest. The two became indistinguishable. Elridge fled before sunset, but did not reach town. His horse was found wandering the road the next morning, riderless. His body was discovered weeks later near the riverbank, his eyes open, one hand pressed against his sternum. The coroner wrote, 'Heart failure of indeterminate origin.' After that, no one was permitted near Ashbourne Hill. The land was purchased quietly by the Ministry of Health, fenced and marked as a quarantine site, though no contamination was specified. Over time, its history was folded into rumor, a haunted estate, a cursed family, whispers of forbidden science, but the rhythm did not cease. In 1974, a team of geology students conducting a seismic survey in the area recorded a faint pulse beneath the limestone bedrock, 30-second intervals, amplitude increasing every 48 hours. The reading persisted for 7 days, then vanished. Their equipment, later examined, bore faint magnetic scoring in circular patterns, as though exposed to alternating polarity. One of the students, now a retired lecturer, later told an interviewer, "It wasn't noise, it was listening as if it knew we'd found it." The site remains sealed under the guise of heritage preservation. Official maps label it simply as Ashbourne Site 9A, access restricted. Yet those who live nearby still speak of the nights when the fog rolls low over the moor and the air hums faintly, just at the edge of hearing. They say, if you stand there long enough, the pulse aligns with your own. And if you linger past that moment, if you let the two rhythms merge, you may hear a voice behind the sound, not a whisper, not a scream, but something calm, measured, eternal. The heart remembers what the body forgets, and then silence. The kind that breathes. If you ever visit Sussex, avoid the fields east of the old railway line after dusk. Locals say the soil there still shifts, slow and patient, like something turning in its sleep. They've buried houses over it, roads, even an electrical substation. None of it lasts. The hum always returns. It doesn't echo anymore. It listens.